Please, just make it quick." A lonely rancher paid $1 for her, and she stood on a wagon, head shrouded in a burlap sack, her feet bleeding onto the weathered wood, hands bound like a common criminal. And they were bidding on her, treating it as a callous game. $1, bellowed a fat man, his laughter a guttural rumble in his chest. "A real savage, yours forever." The crowd joined in, their mirth echoing across the dusty expanse. Old men, their necks etched with sun-baked lines, their breath heavy with whiskey. Young toughs, their boots caked with dirt, their eyes devoid of any compassion. Elias Miller stood at the periphery, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He'd witnessed darkness before, the horrifying depths of it in the mud of Gettysburg, reflected in the eyes of dying boys. But this was something far worse. This was malevolence on public display, a spectacle of cruelty. He should have walked away. That's what men like him did. Keep their heads down, avoid trouble, let the world descend into its own decay. But then the girl stumbled, her knees buckling under the weight of humiliation. That was it. $1, he said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. The boisterous laughter of the crowd ceased abruptly, as if someone had slapped them all silent. The seller smirked, a cruel twist of his lips, announcing, "Sold," to the lonely farmer. He spat, a gesture of mocking triumph. Elias climbed onto the wagon, his movements swift and decisive. He severed the ropes, lifting the rough sack from her head. He anticipated a broken girl, a victim, an empty shell of a human being. Instead, he encountered defiance personified. Her eyes, burning like fiery embers, met his gaze directly. Her shoulders were squared, her posture radiating an unwavering strength, her spirit unbroken. That look, that unflinching defiance, would forever be etched into his memory. He didn't know her name, her history, her story. But he knew in the moment he touched that rope that he'd acquired far more than just a woman. He'd purchased a war he was entirely unprepared for. He didn't speak a single word on the long ride home. It wasn't some deliberate attempt at mystique. He simply didn't know what to say. He'd lived in solitude for 7 years, ever since the death of his beloved Martha. He'd grown accustomed to the quiet, even finding solace in it on some days. But now his quiet existence was disrupted, and not by just any kind of company. A woman who remained silent, offering no words since he had freed her. She didn't weep, didn't express gratitude, didn't show fear. She walked behind his horse barefoot, as if traversing the rough terrain were nothing more than a casual stroll. By the time they reached his ranch, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows. The place seemed smaller than usual, almost ashamed of its desolate appearance. Elias felt the same way, a deep sense of inadequacy washing over him. He gestured toward the small barn, his voice barely a whisper. "You can stay there," he added, almost as an afterthought. "There's water." She didn't acknowledge his words, offering no indication that she'd even heard him. That night, sleep evaded him. The silence wasn't the same anymore. It pulsed with a tangible presence, a palpable energy. The next morning, he left food and coffee on the porch. He didn't witness her taking it, but by midday, the plate was spotless. For 3 days, neither of them spoke, yet a subtle shift began to take place. One morning, he discovered the gate latch meticulously repaired, far better than he himself could have managed. Another day, his torn shirt was expertly mended, looking as good as new. He started talking, not really to her, but aloud, commenting on the cows, the weather, the persistent ache in his aging knee. He received no verbal response, yet he felt her attention, her quiet presence. Then came the storm, a ferocious tempest, a terrifying display of nature's power. Black clouds rolled in rapidly, the wind howling like a freight train. Elias raced to the barn to secure the cattle, and there she stood, silhouetted in the doorway, observing the storm's approach with a disturbing calm, as if facing an age-old enemy. "Get in! Get inside!" he shouted, his voice barely audible above the wind's roar. She remained motionless, unyielding, until a bolt of lightning struck terrifyingly close. He rushed back, seized her arm, and pulled her into the cabin, slamming the door shut behind them. They stood there, drenched to the bone, their hearts pounding in unison, and in that moment, amidst the storm's fury, he saw a flicker of fear in her eyes, a fleeting vulnerability that pierced the stoicism she'd maintained. The storm hadn't scared him, but that glimpse of raw fear did, because for the first time she wasn't merely surviving, she was truly, heartbreakingly human. After that tempestuous night, an unspoken understanding began to bloom between them. It wasn't cemented by words or promises, but by gestures, small acts of kindness and consideration. Every morning, Elias left coffee and a plate of cornbread on the porch. He never saw her retrieve them, yet by mid-morning, they were always gone. She started sitting on the edge of the porch steps, not close, yet no longer in hiding. He learned her name, not from her own lips, but from a drawing etched in the dust. One morning, he found an old saddle, one he'd lost weeks ago, neatly placed on the porch railing. Beside it, a prairie flower delicately drawn in the dirt. That evening, he consulted Martha's well-worn botany book, turning to page 47. There it was, Ayanna, the name of the flower, and in the Comanche language, it meant eternal bloom. The next morning, as he placed the plate of cornbread on the porch, he softly whispered her name, Ayanna. She didn't flinch, didn't meet his gaze, but from that day forward, he continued to speak her name, and each time her eyes lingered a fraction of a second longer, a subtle shift in her demeanor. A few days later, she spoke his name, Elias, a single word, quiet and steady, yet it stopped him cold. After years of silence, his name, uttered by her voice, resonated like a melody, a profound and unexpected symphony of sound. They didn't engage in lengthy conversations. They didn't need to. They began to rebuild the ranch together, her silent diligence in the kitchen, his steadfast work on the land. He read aloud to her in the evenings, stumbling over words, his voice a gentle murmur by the flickering firelight. Sometimes she would smile at his mispronunciations, a small, precious sound that touched his soul. They were building something slow, something honest, something real. One tranquil evening, as he sharpened a hoe near the barn, Ayanna approached and gently placed her hand on his. She didn't utter a word. She didn't need to. It was the first time in a long time that he didn't feel like a man merely surviving. And if he had known what the future held, he might have chosen to sharpen a rifle instead of a hoe. But such is the irony of peace. You never fully appreciate its value until it's threatened with loss. And if you've made it this far, perhaps you're the kind of soul who still believes in stories like theirs. If so, please subscribe. Stay tuned, because the Wild West has countless stories yet to unfold. Word travels swiftly in small towns, especially when idle hands have nothing better to do than spread gossip. In Robb Bend, the whispers about Elias and the Comanche woman had evolved into full-fledged tales. Some called it a scandal, others a joke, but John Smith regarded it as a personal affront. John was the one who had dragged Ayanna into town in the first place. He'd intended to sell her quickly, have a celebratory drink, and move on. Instead, a quiet widower had made him look foolish in front of the entire community. Now, every mention of Elias's name was followed by snickers and laughter. John's pride was deeply wounded, a raw and festering injury, and a man wounded in his pride doesn't forget. He waits, he simmers, until he's ready to unleash his fury. One dusty afternoon, Elias noticed a cloud on the horizon. Not a rain cloud, but the kind kicked up by galloping horses. 4 riders were approaching rapidly. Elias paused his work, his voice calm and steady. "Ayanna," he said, "go inside. Lock the door." She looked up from her garden, saw the approaching dust cloud, and without a word, slipped into the cabin. The riders didn't slow their pace. They arrived bold, loud, and half-drunk, John leading the charge. "Afternoon, Vance," John sneered, spitting the name like a venomous curse. Heard you've been playing house with stolen goods." Elias didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. "She's not stolen," he said, his voice firm. "She's my wife." The words hung heavy in the air, not legally perhaps, but in the deepest sense of my heart. John's laughter was harsh and jarring. "You think that changes anything? She belongs to the town. We paid for her once. We'll take her back now." He dismounted, his hand hovering near his belt as if reaching for a weapon. Elias's rifle was already in his hands, held calmly, steadily. "She's not going anywhere," Elias said, his eyes fixed on John's. "You can leave, or you can find out just how serious I am." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind whispering through the tall grass. Then the cabin door creaked open. Ayanna emerged, not armed, but wearing the blue calico shawl he'd given her. She walked to Elias's side, her head held high. In that moment, she didn't need to speak. She was already home. For a long moment, nobody moved. Elias stood firm, his rifle steady in his hands. Ayanna stood beside him, unarmed, presenting no overt threat, yet her presence spoke volumes, louder than any gunshot. John looked at them, witnessing something he hadn't anticipated. He didn't see fear or confusion. He saw a man and a woman who had weathered too much hardship to be easily intimidated. He mumbled something under his breath and backed away. The others followed suit. They hadn't come for a war. Their intention was to frighten, and they'd failed. By the time their dust cloud disappeared over the horizon, Elias hadn't even lowered his rifle. He simply turned to Ayanna and nodded, a silent acknowledgement of their shared victory. That night, they didn't engage in lengthy conversations. They didn't need to. The immediate danger had passed, but something else had taken root, a profound and enduring peace. Not the kind that slips in quietly and disappears just as quickly, but the kind that's earned, the kind that's fiercely defended, and it remained, season after season. The ranch transformed, as did they. Ayanna's garden flourished, a riot of vibrant colors. Elias's hands grew rougher, but his touch remained steady and sure. They built something together, not from the ashes of what they'd lost, but from the enduring strength of what they chose to preserve. Love, yes, but more importantly, a deep and unwavering trust. And that, my friends, is the true essence of the Wild West. It's not the gunfights or the saloons, the gold or the cattle, but the unyielding resilience required to endure, to rebuild when life reduces everything to ruins, to love again, even when fear threatens to overwhelm. Perhaps you're watching this, reflecting on your own struggles. Maybe you've experienced loss. Maybe you've faced your own version of John Smith. I ask you, what did you stand for when the going got tough? What prevented you from surrendering? And more importantly, who stood beside you, offering unwavering support? If this story has resonated with you, if it's evoked memories or prompted reflection on your own journey, please hit the like button. And if you desire more stories like this, stories that stir your emotions, challenge your thoughts, and perhaps even awaken cherished memories, then do yourself a favor and subscribe. Because out here, in the dust and wind of the Wild West, every now and then, someone finds their way home. And when they do, you'll want to hear their story.